That's right, everyone. Not only has episode 6 been the episode we've been waiting for of Dr. Stone, but Kohaku, the girl that we all loved as soon as we saw her in the opening, is finally in the show. So, before I get into this review of episode 6, I just want to point out that I have other reviews of the previous episodes, so go ahead and check those out. But without further ado, let's get into the review of episode 6. So, this episode starts off where the previous episode left off, which was the flashback with Senku and how he started before Taiju and Yuzuriha and Tsukasa all came into the scene. Now, there are a few things that stuck out to me. These were the most important, at least to me. One, so in my previous review, I noted that it was a little strange how Senku got revived, but they addressed that in this episode, which he happened to conveniently be like maybe 10 yards away from the cave, which I still don't know how the nitric acid would have reached him because I'm not an expert, but I'm pretty sure that's something that would only be in the cave because I'm pretty sure it comes from bat dung, but I don't know. So, again, that doesn't bother me as much as some of the other stuff I've noted, but I like that they addressed it. The other thing that I thought was really interesting was that we find out that Taiju was not in the cave. Senku brought him to the cave, which is really weird because Senku doesn't tell him that he was the one who found him and brought Taiju to the cave. He just sort of does it and then leaves the notes behind for Taiju. So I don't know how important that detail is for the story, but I just thought it was a subtle detail. It could be that Senku just forgot to tell him, but with somebody as sophisticated as Senku, I'm sure he had a reason for doing it. But it stuck out to me. I don't know how important it's going to be to the main story. And then the other thing I noticed, which should have stuck out right away to anybody, but somehow I didn't notice, was that only humans and swallows were the ones who were affected by the stone effect, we'll call it. I thought that was really interesting because when I saw the animals, I figured, oh, well, somehow just through evolution or however, they managed to survive, but not swallows. So I think it's worth researching what sort of connection swallows and humans have. I personally have no idea, but I thought that was a really cool detail. It adds more mystery to the world and to the way that they were all petrified. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was when Senku wrote E equals MC square on his coat. Now, when I first saw that, I thought it was really cliche because science E equals MC square, but it turned out to be a lot more significant than I thought. So when he writes it, he is going through a hard time and he points out, or he says at least, the foundations of science are absolute, which obviously that's true because you have things like the speed of light, which are natural laws that can't be broken. So he writes E equals MC square and writes it in blood on his coat. Now, I think this is another brilliant reinforcement of his character. We've been seeing this little by little in each episode, especially in the last one. But I thought this was a great reinforcement of his character and what he strives to serve and promote, which is human progress and human thought, which I don't think he's in love with science just because it's science. I think he's in love with science because it stands for human intuition and the capability of humans, like no other creature, to pick a problem, figure out how to solve that problem, and then take every step possible to solve that problem. So this was absolutely brilliant in my opinion. So then we come back to after the flashback and we see Senku whisper something to Yuzuriha, which we find out sort of, that he told her and Taiju to go spy on Tsukasa. But I think the scene where you see him whisper and we don't get to see what he says, and he specifically points out, I want this mission for you, this isn't really suited for Taiju. I think this is going to be important to the story because I think there's more to this mission than we're allowed to see and what Taiju is allowed to see. Now, I don't think Senku's manipulating Taiju necessarily, but I think there's something that's going to play out, or there's something that Senku sees in the future that he doesn't want Taiju to know, because Taiju is obviously a very straightforward, very, as he puts it, crude person. So I thought that was a really subtle detail that shouldn't be overlooked. But then we have the scene where Senku contrasts his group and Tsukasa and what will eventually be his group as nations. Now, I really like this because, like every great show, not just anime, every great show, every story should have world building. It's why certain shows, while they have great characters, don't always get talked about in later years, because while characters can have great interactions, the world they inhabit needs to be substantial. Like, for example, a lot of video games can have great mechanics and then boast about how big the world is, but then when you actually explore that world, there's nothing to do. So we know that this is a big world and it's a world full of potential, but so far it's been a very empty world, and we've only been able to conceive of the characters that we've talked about so far. But just that format, just that background of nations, it really sets the mood for what could be great potential for world building, which, again, I've been saying that this has the potential to be one of the greatest anime of all time. So how this world building gets handled could add on to the greatness of that show. And now, my favorite part of this whole episode, Kohaku's introduction was insane. So, we see her come up on Tsukasa with flowers. Now, it comes up that she's obviously primitive because she thought that all the science that went down earlier was some sort of magic or sorcery. But she's clearly not stupid, because she walked up on Tsukasa, who, as we recall, punched a lion in the face like it was nothing. So she comes up on him with the flowers, which caught me off guard, because I was like, what's she doing here? But this was clearly a trick to try and catch Tsukasa off guard, which worked for like maybe half a second. But then she stands hand to hand with Tsukasa, who, again, punched a lion in the face. Like, this is the most roided up high schooler I've ever met in my life. Like, this guy is insane. So she stands hand to him. Granted, she doesn't really do any damage to him, but she's skilled enough to catch him off guard when she tries to kick him in the face. And he even says, like, if she had been around before the petrification, she wouldn't have gone unnoticed by people in the martial arts world because she seems so skilled in combat. So the fact that she gave Tsukasa a run for his money is like just ridiculous. So there's that part, but then she seems to have a really clear sense of morality, which, again, she's primitive, but she's clearly not stupid, because you see her just call out Tsukasa. I saw you hold the girl, Yuzuriha, as a hostage, and then brutally murder the guy who tried to defend the girl. So I don't even care like what your deal is. I'm just going to take you out. So she clearly has a very strong sense of morality. We don't know exactly how far that morality goes yet, but I can only imagine we're going to learn as we see her interact with other characters. But she's definitely one of my favorite characters so far. I mean, I've been a really big fan of Yuzuriha because she brings a certain not softness, but she lightens the mood of the cast because Senku and Taiju are very intense characters. So to have Yuzuriha, she's not comic relief, but she lightens the atmosphere. But that's not Kohaku's rule at all. She is clearly a character who could beat the crap out of just about anybody in the show. So I think she's awesome. I mean, again, hand to hand with Tsukasa, she has a very clear sense of right and wrong, and she's very skilled in combat. Like, I don't understand why it took so long to meet her. She's just so cool. So, again, the best part with her, though, is when Senku sees what happens and he comes to save her. After she sees what he does with the pulleys to come and save her, and again, she saw the whole scene when he tried to save Yuzuriha, she says to him, "You have a really strong sense of urgency." Or actually, she says, she points out that he's really diligent with problems and that he commits himself to solving those problems until it's carried out to the end. And she's right on the money. I mean, the whole reason he's obsessed with science is because it reinforces human ingenuity and the idea that humans are special and that we identify problems that need to be solved and do everything in our power to solve that problem. And if we don't have that power, we figure out how to get it. So she sees that right away. She's primitive, so she doesn't have a clear idea of how exactly science works. But she sees in Senku, in his character, what it is she admires about people like him who are committed to scientific thinking. And she says that, "I clearly have a very strong liking to you." So without even consciously thinking about it, she already likes something. She really admires Senku. So I'm really looking forward to her relationship with Senku. Now, I've seen some spoilers of what happens, so I'm not going to get into that, but she's definitely going to be one of my favorite characters. There isn't a single character that I'm disappointed with, but Kohaku could possibly end up being my favorite character in this show. But thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to hear from you soon.